The river country was green that year, swollen with snow water out of the high Rockies, and to a boy from St. Louis, it looked like the very ribs of creation. Cottonwoods leaned over mud-brown water, their leaves turning silver in the wind, willows bent low along sandbars where beaver cut and dragged, and the morning air carried that quiet smell of wet earth and new grass that belongs to places not yet claimed by plow or fence. Joseph MacKinnon, 17 years old and untested, stood in a dugout canoe and stared at it all with the dumb wonder of someone who had imagined wilderness but never felt it press against his ribs. He would remember the sound first, the deep, unbroken sweep of a prairie wind, and then the silence that followed it, as though the world paused to breathe before continuing its long work of river and sky. Fort Union rose squat and pale against that horizon, adobe walls and timbered gates, smoke curling from cook fires inside. He had never seen a place so far from clock and bell. When the boat touched shore, a man in buckskins, hair tied with a strip of otter fur, beckoned him forward. "You're late to the mountains, boy," the man said. He had a voice rough as a rasp, and the narrow eyes of one who measured men by how they moved. Most head for the rendezvous years before they sprout mustache whiskers. Joseph flushed, but kept his jaw set. "I aim to learn," he said. "Aye," the man replied, "and the West will aim to teach." His name was Ezekiel Price Zeke, to the men a trapper long in the teeth and lean as a rail. Beside him stood another, darker-skinned, hair braided long, a Crow man called He Breaks the Snow by His People, and simply Snow by the Brigade. Snow had married a trapper's daughter and drifted between worlds like a pine cone, riding two currents at once. It was they who took Joseph in. That night in the fort's yard, the boy watched men trade pelts for powder, drink trade whiskey that smelled of turpentine, and gamble away winter's labor with the easy fatalism of men who had seen brothers drown under ice or vanish into Blackfeet country. A fiddle scraped somewhere above the din. Laughter burst like rifle crack. Mules stamped and snorted in the dust. He felt young among them, like a sapling in a forest of wind-scarred trunks. Snow sat cross-legged by the fire, shaping a willow withe into a snare, and spoke without looking up. "River takes the soft first," he said. "Wind takes the foolish next, fire takes the proud." Joseph did not yet understand. He only nodded, thinking of bears and arrows, not wind-driven flame. Their brigade left at dawn. The river mist hung low as they poled upstream, 8 men and 2 canoes heavy with traps, kettles, and powder horns. Geese cut V-shapes overhead, muskrats plinked into water as paddles dipped. Zeke motioned to Joseph. "Write your thoughts proper," he said. "A man forgets without a ledger. Ask Jed Smith's ghost if." His papers hadn't lived, neither would his name. Joseph took the small notebook they had given him, stiff and new, and put his first words to paper. "I observed this day the river running high and the beaver thick ensign. Cottonwoods good for poles. Saw sign of crow ponies on high ground." It felt clumsy, but Zeke nodded at it, and for the first time Joseph felt the faint pride of belonging. Weeks passed like river braids, bending, splitting, joining again. He learned to set traps by moonlight, to skin beaver without fouling the pelt, to feel weather in his bones before clouds showed it. He learned that hunger had many voices. The hollow belly of long travel, the bite of thin winter rations, the ache when a partner went missing and no one spoke of him again. Snow taught him to move silent, to see sign in bent grass and chipped bark. On quiet nights they spoke low in the Blackfeet tongue and in English mixed with French voyageurs' patois. Joseph learned that a man could speak many ways and mean the same truths. One evening, as firelight flickered on cottonwood trunks, Snow said softly, "The land lives by burning. Grass dies, comes again stronger. Pine cones wait for heat to open. Fire is breath, same as wind." Joseph frowned. "Then why do men fear it so?" Snow looked into the flames. "Because fools build where fire walks." It sounded like riddle then. Later he would recall it as law. Come late summer they reached the mussel-shell country, rolling grass, low brush, sky like hammered tin. They trapped a creek rich with beaver dams and camped near a settler's cabin, sod-roofed and raw-timbered, newly built by a man from Kentucky who bragged he'd raise cattle there come spring. Zeke said nothing, only eyed the sea of dry grass around the cabin, thigh-high and yellow as old parchment. 2 days later, thunderheads rolled wide and low. Lightning cracked in coulees to the south. Joseph smelled smoke before he saw it faint, like scorched sap. Zeke stiffened. Grassfire comes quick, first a whisper, then a run. Wind found flame and carried it, tongues racing through the plain faster than horses could think. The cabin's owner shouted, hauling water in a tin bucket like a man bailing the ocean. His wife cried, clutching a child. Zeke barked orders clear brush, dig earth, but the fire had already chosen its road. It roared across the grass like a living thing, crackling, snapping, heat rolling before it. When it reached the cabin, shingles hissed, sod steamed, logs caught. In minutes the roof sagged like wet parchment. Sparks whirled upward into the wind and vanished. From a low swale where they had thrown themselves with wet blankets, Joseph watched the cabin fall. Smoke stung his eyes and lungs, ash settled on his skin, the air tasted of sap and charred grass. When the wind died, there was nothing left but black earth and a chimney stump leaning like a gravestone. Snow spoke first, voice quiet as dusk. "Fire walks? Here. Only a fool builds without asking where it goes." Zeke nodded. "A cabin ain't walls. It's the dirt around it, the roof above it, and the ground scraped clean to meet it." Joseph did not answer. He stared at the ruin. Something in him shifted a slow settling of truth like silt after floodwater drops. That night he wrote in his journal by moonlight, "I observed this day a house burnt to the ground for want of labor that would have cost one man 3 days, grass left standing, no trench dug. Fire came swift as horse. Land took what pride made. He slept little afterward, hearing again the roar, feeling heat on his face. The smell clung to him, ash, smoke, damp wool. He could not shake it. In the morning, as sunlight washed the blackened prairie and crows picked at smoldering sticks, Zeke placed a hand on his shoulder. "Remember what you seen," he said. "Mountains teach, if a man lives long enough to listen." Snow stood beside them, hair turning in the wind, like dark river grass. "The land burns to live," he murmured again. "Remember, boy, fire is older than iron." Joseph nodded, and something in his eyes, once green as river reeds, settled into the quiet hardness of a man who has faced an older law than men's. He did not yet know it, but that morning marked the first line of the legend to come. A cabin lost, a boy watching flame take pride, and a lesson sinking deep into marrow. In years ahead, men would call him stubborn, call him odd, call him Crazy Joe. But long before the name stuck, the fire had already begun its schooling. Snow came early that year, not drifting gentle but falling thick and wet, as though the sky tore loose whole feathers of winter and dropped them across the high country. The aspens were bare, creek ice thick as a handspan, and even the wolves' howls felt sharpened by hunger. Joseph MacKinnon, now 2 years older, carried the mountain look in him, shoulders drawn forward by packs and rifles, beard rough, eyes working always, measuring wind and ridge the way a merchant weighs coin. He had stayed with Zeke through 2 seasons. He had wintered among the Crow, sleeping in lodges that smelled of smoke and tanned hides, listening to stories of the long-ago time when men lived without iron or horses and walked where the buffalo led. He had learned to ride the plains like water runs downhill, to read storm by the taste of air, to feel snow's mood under his feet. But that winter, the hunger winter, was the one that burned deepest. They were trapping along the upper Yellowstone, the world white and brittle as glass, when the buffalo herds broke south and elk vanished into the timber. Snow told Joseph it was a sign the animals knew what men had yet to learn. "The cold will not eat like a wolf," Snow said, staring toward the mountains, "but like sickness, slow, then sudden." By late moon, they were down to marrow bones boiled twice and the last flour, clenched in its sack like a miser's final coin. Zeke went slow in the mornings, fingers stiff, breath ragged. A man could freeze by inches without ever lying down, eyes dulling like a candle guttering at wind. One evening the wind dropped and the world turned to stillness. Snow pointed with his chin toward the horizon. There, far off, the sky carried a pale red blush beneath the cloud line, not sunset. For the sun had long fallen, but something else. Joseph frowned. "Aurora?" Snow shook his head. Not light of heaven, light of wood, cabin burns, or camp burns. They were 3 days from any trader's shack. Fire in such weather could mean warmth and shelter, or a grave. Zeke coughed into his mitten and wiped blood. Could be crow hunters, he rasped. Or could be whites. Either way, we go. Fire means food or news. They pushed hard next morning, snowshoes scraping, breath freezing on mustaches. By nightfall they smelled it wood smoke, faint and bitter. And something else under it, wet ash. A day later they found the truth. It had been a small cabin, rough-hewn logs, a sod roof gone to steam, and a circle of blackened snow around it. 2 charred beams lay like broken ribs. Smoke still whispered from the embers. No one living remained. Snow knelt in the soot, fingertip brushing the scorched earth. Fire came from grass, high wind. He pointed to bare willow stalks scorched clean. "Run fast," Joseph swallowed. "What of the men?" Snow shrugged. "Gone or ash, same to the crows of the sky." For hours Joseph stood staring at that ruin. Something in him stirred again the memory of mussel-shell grass, the family's cries, his own helplessness. He felt the same truth settle, heavier now. Cabins were not claimed by rifles alone. They were claimed by foresight or fire. That night he wrote in his journal with trembling fingers, "I observed this day a cabin burnt in winter. No trench, roof of brush, not sod. Men. Gone. Learned that fire does not sleep for cold. Wind is its brother." They pressed on, rationing each step. Zeke grew weaker. Snow trapped a lone rabbit, split it 3 ways. Joseph boiled bark tea to quiet the gnawing in belly and ribs. Then came the night Joseph nearly died. A blizzard fell silent, not whistling, not screaming, just smothering. The wind drifted powder high over the low ground, and Joseph, walking at dusk, stepped into a buried cut bank. Snow swallowed him whole. He fell like a stone through soft earth, panic clawing at him. Snow hissed above like a blanket tossed over fire. For a long moment he could not breathe. The world pressed close. Cold dug teeth into his bones. He remembered words Snow had spoken nights before. "When winter covers a man, only breath, and will dig him free." He kicked, hard. Packed snow shifted. He clawed upward, lungs screaming. Then a hand Zeke seized his jacket and hauled, grunting. Joseph burst into air like a trout to surface, eyes wild. He fell on his knees, gasping, coughing ice dust. Snow stood nearby, face unreadable. "Cold kills fools first," Snow said softly. "Fire kills proud men, cold kills careless ones." But there was no laughter in him, only truth. They reached a Crow winter camp 3 days later. Joseph remembered little of that arrival, only warm hides thrown over him, and broth, thin as river water, but life itself. Smoke curled through lodge poles. Children stared at him wide-eyed, whispering at the half-frozen white man who had clawed his way out of winter's throat. Zeke lived, barely. Snow's people fed them marrow, chokecherry cakes, and boiled hoof. Slowly warmth seeped back. Before they left in spring, an old Crow woman pressed her palm to Joseph's chest and said in halting English, "You walk 2 worlds, the living and the dead. Do not forget who pulled you." He would not. He could not. From that winter, Joseph carried 2 hungers, one for the wild and one for the wisdom of those who survived it longest. He learned that life in mountains was not won by the strongest, nor by the boldest, but by the ones who listened to wind, to snow, to flame. Fire had taken cabins. Cold had nearly taken him. Both had tried to claim his name. Joseph MacKinnon walked out of that winter thinner, quieter, a man who had already begun to outlive the world he walked in. And though no one yet called him Crazy Joe, the seeds of that name lay buried like embers in snow, waiting for wind. There are seasons a man remembers like scars, and seasons that pass over him like wind on tall grass, leaving little but a whisper. The decade that followed Joseph MacKinnon into manhood held both kinds. The fur trade waned, fortunes shifted, and the wild country began its long, slow tilt toward fences and town lots. But Joseph lived in the margin between eras, neither fully of the old trapping days, nor yet a settler. Alone, mostly. Quiet as a stump after fire. He wintered where rivers forked and summers where pines climbed the ridges. Crow camps became fewer, white wagons more. At times he rode freight loads along the Missouri, drove oxen for wages, or split cordwood for steamboats pushing west. Yet always he returned to timber and solitude when coin jingled heavy enough to buy powder and salt. He said little to men, but the land he spoke to often in notebook scratches and quiet mutters, the habit of one who has spent too long among rivers and trees instead of parlors. He built his first cabin in the Judith Basin in the spring of 1842. Nothing grand, just peeled log walls, sod roof, and a small stone hearth. He cleared brush a few steps from the door, but not far enough. It was a cabin made like young pride makes things straight, quick, and without enough questions asked of the ground it sat on. For months it held fine smoke curling from the chimney, venison drying on poles, coffee boiling black and strong each dawn. Joseph felled spruce, cached berries in pits lined with willow, and tanned hides on frames set in sun. Elk wandered close, unbothered by one quiet man and his axe song in the morning. Then July came dry, near colorless under a white-hot sky. Grass crisped early, snapping under moccasin and boot. Lightning walked the hills as if impatient, and wind carried heat even at night. Joseph smelled trouble before he saw it, a faint sweetness like sap scorched in kettle. Then the far horizon bruised purple-brown. The fire arrived low and quick, not a roaring wall but a serpent tongue flicking through grass, dancing with the wind's madness. Joseph had time to throw wet blankets on the roof and stamp at embers, but not time enough. Flames hopped like hares through the brittle bunchgrass. Heat beat against him like fists. When the cabin roof smoldered and smoked, then hissed and flared, he knew pride had built him a poor refuge. He fled to the creek, breath ragged, dragging his bedroll and rifle, and crawled belly down into thick mud near a willow bend. Smoke rolled overhead. Sparks hissed in water. Hours passed like years. By dusk, all that stood of his cabin was a single blackened wall, leaning against the sky like a sinner begging forgiveness. That night, wrapped in wet wool, Joseph wrote in his journal, with shaking fingers lit by ember moonlight. I observed this night the fire took what pride built. I cut brush but half measure. I dug no ditch nor clayed my roof. The land warns first, fools answer after flame speaks. He did not curse the land. Men cursed when they thought disaster unfair. Joseph knew better. Fire had no malice. It simply obeyed its nature. It punished carelessness and pride. In that way, it was like winter, like hunger, like the river in flood teachers that spoke in pain but truth. He walked away from the ruin in morning's gray light, pack on shoulders, soot still clinging to beard and skin. He did not look back until the ridge, and then only once. He whispered a single sentence, more vow than lament, never again. For years after, Joseph drifted quieter than wind in lodgepole crowns. The trapping brigades thinned, rendezvous faded into memory. Mountain men turned scout, soldier, freighter, or ghost. Some, like Bridger and Carson, found names etched in maps and army rolls. Others simply disappeared into a century that no longer needed them. Joseph chose not fame nor crowds. He chose timber and work. He studied beaver lodges, noting how they banked mud and clay against water and fire both. He carved notches in trees to mark how high flame had climbed in seasons past. He watched Crow families burn grass in spring to thin fuel and call buffalo. He sat with old trappers who spoke, pipe smoke soft, about cabins lost to sparks from carelessness or lightning. He absorbed it all. By 1848, when gold rumors swept the land, Joseph was already building again, this time on a small bench above a spring-fed creek near the timberline west of the Muscle Shell. He cut a ring of earth around the site first, scraping to bare mineral soil. He felled trees in a wide circle, leaving stump and earth exposed, nothing to carry fire to his walls. He laid his roof in double thickness, then sod, then clay. He chinked cracks with mud mixed with horsehair and moss. He buried water barrels in shaded pits. Neighbors few as they were shook heads when they rode by. "Diggin' like a badger, that one," a freighter remarked. "Trenchin' for the end of the world." Might be the fire took his sense. Joseph only worked and wrote, "I observe this day a roof weighted with stone does not fear wind nor ember. Better to labor in calm than panic in flame." He spoke seldom, but his eyes saw everything smoke on horizon, wind shift in tree crowns, dry moss on logs. He lived lean, content, not lonely. Solitude to him was not emptiness, but clarity. The world kept moving without. And him wagon trails cut the plains, riverboats churned past Fort Union, missionaries built chapels where Crow lodges once stood. Young men talked of California gold, not beaver. Yet Joseph felt no hurry to chase new fortunes. He had already chosen his wealth, time, silence, knowledge, and a roof that would not betray him when flame walked. And so the years passed, marked not by clocks or tavern calendars, but by frost on spruce, thawing rivers, the first meadowlark cry in spring, the musk of bear trails, and the crackle of aspen leaves in autumn. Those who met him called him peculiar. Some called him half-wild. A few, not unkindly, called him the man who forgot to die, for he had survived fire, winter, hunger, and solitude. Joseph never corrected them, for he knew the truth. He had not forgotten to die. He had simply learned how to live where death was always near, and the lessons the land taught him, patient and harsh, carved by flame and frost, were not yet complete. The greatest trial still waited, shimmering in the future like heat above summer grass, a trial of wind and spark and roaring judgment, a trial that would turn mockery into legend. But for now, he simply tightened the sod on his roof and listened to the wind comb the pines, thinking only, fire remembers. The world shifted again, though slowly, like ice loosening on a river in early thaw. Where once the prairie wind had carried only the hiss of grass and the far-off call of hawks, now came the jangle of harness and the metallic clink of tools. Ranch outfits pushed up from the Yellowstone and Judith country, stringing wire, driving cattle into valleys where beaver once ruled. Young men in broad hats and rawhide gloves spoke of brands, not pelts, of winter feed, not rendezvous. And up in the timber above the mussel shell lived Joseph MacKinnon, a man out of time, like a last tree left standing after a logging crew moved on. His hair had silvered at the temples, beard thick as buffalo wool. His coat was wool and buckskin both, patched with the stubborn care of one who wastes nothing. He moved deliberate as weather, spoke seldom, and watched more than he was ever seen. His cabin, the second one, the one fire had not earned, stood like a squat fortress in a clearing scraped bare. No brush dared hug its walls, no dry grass lived within 30 paces. The soil around it was turned to hard brown earth, as though plow and boot had waged a private war against fuel. Stones weighted the sod roof, and the trench Joseph had dug long ago curved like a scar around the house, 2 feet deep, bare to mineral soil. To a cowhand riding past, it looked like the hut of a man who had prepared for siege from ghosts. And so the talk grew. Crazy Joe builds a moat round a cabin. Herdy sleeps with wet blankets by the door. Fella keeps barrels buried like squirrel nuts, water stored like doomsday's tomorrow. Some say he eats alone so he can hear fire breathe. Men laughed, the way men do when faced with someone who answers to no clock or crowd. They had rail-spike sense, practical, hurried, eager to make a life by sweat and cattle. A lone woodsman digging ditches for flames they could not see felt like superstition or madness. But sometimes, when wind came downslope, smelling faintly of pine sap and something sharper memory, maybe, or instinct, a few quiet men felt a flicker of understanding they did not voice. Joseph did not bristle at the name Crazy Joe. He had worn harsher names in harsher times. Men once called the mountain trapper Wolfman, Crow Lover, Stubborn Ghost, and each had been true in part. Names were not chains unless a man let them tighten. He kept to rhythm. Dawn, haul creek water, check his buried barrels, mend clay chinking, cut grass low as boot tops in a new 30-pace ring each spring. Noon, hunt meat or cut wood. Dusk, walk the ridges, smelling wind, reading clouds. Night, sit by low. Fire, back to chimney stone. Journal open. I observed this day the wind out of west, and the pines shedding needles early. Ground bone dry. Clouds built high but gave no rain. I remember the mussel shell cabin and sharpened my spade. Sometimes boys from nearby ranches, curious, bold in the way youth believes danger only comes to other men, would ride up and watch him work. One day a boy of about 12 years, freckles and straw hair, called out, "What you diggin' for, Mr. Joe?" Joseph straightened, wiped clay on his trouser leg. "Same thing beaver digs for." "Water?" "Safety," Joseph said. "Water's part of it." The boy squinted. "My pa says you're loco for fire." Joseph's eyes softened, not offended, but patient. "Your pa ever see a wind carry sparks a mile? Ever hear pine crowns roar? Ever smell a man's coat light from ash fall?" The boy shifted in his saddle. "No, sir." "Then he don't know yet. But he will. The West teaches. Everyone. Some learn early." The boy swallowed, nodded once, and rode back down the trail. Years later that boy would remember the tone, not the words, the certainty of a man who spoke of fire as if it had a face and mood. Neighbors came sometimes in summer, when chores were light. They'd stand hands on hips, grinning, watching Joseph tamp clay around his eaves. "Ain't you tired fussin' over that roof?" one rancher laughed. Joseph didn't pause. "A roof don't fail in storm. It fails the calm years before." "You build for fear," another said. Joseph shook his head. "I build for memory. Fire forgets nothing. Neither do I." They left shaking heads, sure of their rightness. Settlers believed in bullet and backbone. They had not yet met the kind of enemy that cannot be shot nor fenced. Despite whispers and chuckles in saloons down valley, Joseph was not shunned. He traded venison for flour, mended tack for an old ranch widow, hunted wolves for men losing calves. He lived apart but not hostile, simply distant, like a stone that refused to roll downhill with others. In winter he visited a Crow-kin family near the Mussel Shell, speaking quiet with old friends, sharing coffee and pemmican. Children listened wide-eyed when he told them of the old brigade days, of rivers thick with beaver, of lodges stretching a valley long. Elders nodded solemnly when he spoke of fire cycles, of grass that must burn to live. Crow women would sometimes bring him bundles of dry moss for chinking. Old men would say, "That one listens to the land. He hears what most forget." Up in the white men's town, the phrase shortened through lazy mouths into something different. "He talks to the wind. He listens too hard. And then, he's touched. He's crazy." Such is the way of stories when told by men who measure sanity only by how closely another man resembles themselves. One evening, as sun bled gold through lodgepoles, Joseph sat carving a trench deeper, sweat streaking dust on his brow. A young rancher, sober and curious, approached. "Joe," he asked, "why put so much work into a house might never burn?" Joseph paused, leaning on his spade like it was a rifle in old war. His eyes were calm, not warning, not pride. "Because a man has only two choices," he said softly. "Learn from the land or pay what it demands." Wind stirred pine branches overhead. Resin scent floated on air. Somewhere far off, a hawk cried sharp, lonely, eternal. Joseph tipped his hat brim low and returned to digging. Below him, the valley murmured with new life barns, young families, cattle bawling. But in the trees above, the wind carried another story. Dry needles whispering, memory smoldering, the patient breath of fire biding its time. Soon the world would understand what Joseph already knew. Fire does not punish men. It simply reveals them. It began not with flame, but with silence, that odd, watchful hush the woods sometimes take before a storm or a death. The birds quieted first. Jays, usually quarrelsome as gamblers at a whiskey table, fell still. Squirrels vanished into their green world and did not scold from branches. The wind blew, but the pines did not whisper. Their needles hung limp, drinking heat as though the sky poured molten iron instead of sunlight. Joseph MacKinnon lifted his head from the log he was splitting and sniffed the air. Sap, dry as powder, dust, a faint resin taste on the tongue, like chewing old pine pitch. Then something else, the memory of smoke before smoke is visible. He lowered the axe slowly. I observed this day no cloud in the sky, yet a heaviness in air, as if weather holds its breath. He set his tools aside, with the care a trapper gives to a loaded rifle, and walked to the rise above his cabin. From there, the world unfolded, ridges rolling away, lodgepole pine marching in ranks, coulees pale with summer drought. And far to the west, barely there, if a man wasn't hunting for it, a thin smear in the sky. Gray-brown, too low for cloud, too steady for dust. Joseph narrowed his eyes. So, it comes. By evening the smear thickened, bruising the horizon. Horses down valley grew restless. Cattle bawled, low and uneasy. A ranch hand galloped past Joseph's lower trail, sweat dark on his shirt, face set. "Fire up the Yellowstone way," he shouted without slowing. "Wind's turning north." Joseph only raised a hand in acknowledgement. Panic helped no man. He worked through twilight, pulled his cache covers tight, soaked his wool blankets in creek water and hung them near the door. Checked his trench with the toe of his boot, scraping it deeper where it had settled, piled dirt and clay at the threshold, filled buckets. Set aside a soaked buffalo robe, heavy as sorrow, waiting for his shoulders if flame drew near. Each motion slow, deliberate, not the frenzy of a man afraid, but the ceremony of one who has rehearsed a meeting with an old enemy. Owls called, uneasy. Coyotes did not sing. A red band sat on the west horizon, not sunset now, but reflection, a hell glow trembling above mountains. By midnight, wind rose. It came not in gusts, but in one steady push, as if some enormous bellows in the far timberline exhaled. Needles rattled, dust lifted in eddies. Joseph's cabin creaked once, low and patient, like an ox shifting its weight before a pull. He slept little. Sat by a low ember fire indoors, rifle across his knees, not for man nor beast, but for the comfort familiar iron can bring when the world outside grows unknowable. He listened. Every crack of twig, every breath of wind, every sigh of wood settling felt like footfalls in dark. Dawn broke copper-colored, sun rose red and swollen through a smoky veil. The smell came then, heavy, sweet, and bitter together, burning pitch, green wood giving way, the ancient perfume of a forest dying. Men from the valley rode past his clearing, in small groups. They paused at his ring of bare earth, at the sod-packed roof, at the barrels and wet blankets ready. One called out, voice frayed by fear, "Joe, you comin' down with us? Fire's eaten half the range already." Joseph shook his head. "Down there is grass. Here is earth. Fire walks down slope faster than it climbs." The men exchanged looks, some pity, some disbelief. Some, quieter, with a flicker of respect they did not have words for. "You're stayin'?" the rider asked softly. Joseph nodded once. "A man don't run from weather he built for." They rode on, urgency whipping their horses. Dust trailed them like ghosts. By midday the wind roared, a constant engine, driving heat ahead of flame. Ash began to fall, small flecks at first, as though someone tore bits of gray paper in the sky and let them drift. Then pine needles, burned to curls. Then sparks brief, angry, dying on bare soil. Joseph pulled the wet robe over his shoulders, pressed. Mud around the doorframe again. Laid on the floor close to earth, sucking air through damp cloth. The cabin darkened. Smoke crept under door, patient and sly. Then sound. Fire has many voices. The crackle of dry twigs, the sigh of grass. But a crown fire in pine timber is thunder made hunger. It rolls, it bellows, it laughs. Joseph had heard wolves circle a dying man once. He had heard river ice break under hoof in spring flood. None compared. The ridge above him glowed, then erupted trees torching in seconds, flame leaping from crown to crown, running like deer. The fire reached his trench, stumbled, rolled along bare dirt, searching. Sparks landed on sod, hissed, died. Embers hit the stone-weighted roof, skittered like angry insects. Heat pressed through logs. The cabin breathed hot, alive in a terrible way. Joseph lay still, sweat-stinging eyes, breath shallow. He whispered to no one, voice cracked but steady. Not this time. Hours passed, or minutes. Time twisted in. Heat and smoke. His ears rang with roar until he could not tell wind from flame. And then quiet, not complete, but waning. The monster's voice moving on, hungry elsewhere. A little breeze followed, cool and almost gentle, as if the land exhaled after holding its lungs in fire. Joseph pushed open the door. The handle scorched his palm. Outside, the world was ash and silence. The trees were charcoal soldiers frozen mid-March. No birds, no insect hum, only a faint crackle where pine sap still boiled in dead trunks. His cabin stood, darkened, smoked, but standing. He closed his eyes once. Not relief, not triumph. Just a long, slow breath like a debt paid. I observed this day that calm labor in seasons of peace outlives panic in seasons of fear. From the valley below came distant shouts, confused, grieving, astonished. The world would learn soon enough. Word would spread. Crazy Joe's cabin still stands. And fire, having tested him again, moved on without speaking for it. Spares no man, only acknowledges the few who have listened closely enough to match its memory. Morning came gray as a lead pot, ash drifting like winter snow across a world stripped naked. In the first thin light, the hills looked like the bones of some ancient beast ribs of black timber, gullies drawn in soot, earth scorched to raw clay. The forest was gone, but not silent. Now and again a pine, hollowed by fire from the inside, collapsed with a dull groan, sending up a puff of gray dust like a sigh from a dying world. Joseph MacKinnon stood outside his cabin doorway, shirt scorched, hair singed at the ends, skin cracked and pink in places where heat had licked too close. He moved slowly, stiffly, not old now by years, but by burden. His hands were black to the wrists, mud-hardened like second skin. A wet robe hung across a log rail, steaming in the dawn chill. His cabin, smoke-stained and battle-scarred, was still there. Low roof sagged in places where sod had baked, logs, dark and beaded with pitch scars, clay chinking cracked from heat. But it stood, solid, dutiful, like a mule still breathing after a long pull through winter. Joseph touched its wall as though greeting the living thing. I observed this morning the cabin warm yet whole, the land speaks by fire. I listened and lived. He looked downslope. Where once the valley had rippled green with late summer grass, now stretched a field of ash and blackened stubble. Fences gone, homestead cabins gone, barns piles of gray timber and twisted hinges. The creek bed shone like dull metal, stripped of willow and shade. A shape moved upon the trail, first a blur, then a man on horseback, coat dusted white with ash. Behind him came more riders. Their pace was slow. The urgency of flight had burned away. Only exhaustion and dread guided their reins now. The first rider halted at the edge of Joseph's clearing, hat low, face streaked with soot, and something deeper disbelief, maybe. Or the rawness of a man seeing his own world ruined. "Joe," he said, voice hoarse. "By God, you're alive." Joseph nodded. "The fire walked through here yesterday." "Walked?" The man barked a short, humorless breath. Seemed it galloped everywhere else. Others rode up. Men Joseph had seen at the trading post, at the freight trail, leaning at saloon doors. Faces he knew only by habit of nodding. Their eyes swept the clearing, the trench, the scraped circle where no brush dared grow. Their gazes rose to his roof, sod darkened, stones holding fast. Some stared at the buried barrels by the eaves, lids cracked for air. One dismounted, knelt near the trench, rubbed the dirt between his fingers. He looked up. "You dug this for fire." Joseph said nothing. The truth was plain. A younger ranch hand spoke next, voice cracking like a boy's though his beard was full. Every place down valley burned. Henderson's, Mahoney's, the freight station, even the line camp. Horses ran wild, through smoke. Folks lucky to be breathin'. Joseph nodded once, slow. Wind turned wicked 2 hours before it hit here. The ranch hand swallowed, eyes shining though not from smoke now. "My wife, we got her out." "House is gone." Joseph's voice softened. "I am glad she lives." Silence. The men shifted in saddles, weary bones creaking. One old homesteader pulled his hat off, held it to his chest, and stared at Joseph's roof as if trying to understand stone and clay as scripture. Finally, a voice from the back cracked, bitter but humbled. "Folks been callin' you crazy a long spell, Joe." Joseph brushed ash from his sleeve. "Prairie remembers longer than men do." Another rider dismounted, walking the cabin perimeter. He traced the bare ring of earth with his boot, studied the sod thickness at the eaves. His eyes were not mocking now, they were sharp, measuring, learning. "Why'd you do all this?" he asked quietly. "All these years?" Joseph met his gaze. "Because I already lost one house to fire. And I've walked out of winter with hunger in my ribs and frost in my beard. Bad things always come again. Better a man meet 'em prepared than begging heaven to change its mind." A hush settled. Men did not always worship wisdom outright. Pride stands stubborn, but they recognized truth when it stood before them, blackened and breathing, cabin behind him like proof drawn in charcoal and sweat. The young ranch hand whispered, "You were right, Joe." Joseph shook his head. "Not right, just listening. Fire speaks. So does wind. So does snow. A man don't survive by arguing with land." A soft wind moved across the clearing, stirring ash like ghosts. One man wiped his face with a dirty sleeve. "Teach us," he murmured. "Teach us how to build so we don't lose it all again." Joseph looked at him long, saw the earnestness, the humility bought with loss. "You don't build against fire," Joseph said. "You build with memory. First you clear, then earth bank. Sod roof, clay seams, water cached, tools close by, and never let pride stack brush near your walls." A few men nodded, committing it to heart. Others stared at the horizon, where faint sun tried to claw through smoke. The old homesteader put his hat back on, voice rough. "Reckon we got to start again." Joseph looked at the valley, charred, stripped, humbled. Yet already, in black soil, he could see seeds sleeping, waiting. "You will," he said. "Grass comes back, trees too. Fire burns so life can grow after." Then he added, softer, "But memory must root too, or the flames return stronger." The men mounted, reins loose in hands, tired from fleeing, building, losing. As they rode down the trail, none laughed, none whispered, "Crazy." Some tipped hats, one wiped eyes. Another looked back long, as if to etch the cabin into his mind like a map to safety. Joseph watched until they disappeared, into the gray world below. Only then did he turn, step inside his scarred cabin, and close the door gently, like a man who knows survival has never been luck, but understanding. Outside, the forest still smoked. Inside, a kettle hissed, a journal lay open, and on the first line of a new page he wrote, "I observe this day that fire spares the humble and scolds the proud. The land keeps tally where men forget." He dipped his quill again. Today they came with ash on their boots and silence in their throats. Soon they will build, may they build remembering. He paused, then added one last line, "The West is not conquered, it is obeyed." And the quiet in that cabin was not loneliness, but earned peace, the kind only a man who has faced flame and remained can ever truly know. Autumn laid itself gently over the burned hills, as if the land bruised and black, scarred by heat, deserved a soft hand to close the season. The grasses, what few shoots dared rise, were green in stubborn strips where creek banks held life. Nature has never truly pitied men, but she sometimes grants them grace after teaching her lesson. Joseph MacKinnon rose each dawn and walked his clearing, boots whispering on bare earth. He carried a shovel in one hand like a staff, rifle slung behind. Smoke no longer hung in the air, only the memory of it, sweet and acrid, like something finished but not forgotten. He repaired roof sod, pressed fresh clay into cracks, trimmed back new shoots of brush. A man does not discard vigilance simply because danger has passed. Most men forget once the burn cools. Joseph never did. He had lived too long not to know how seasons turn in circles, not lines. One morning in late September, hoarfrost on the grass, he heard hooves. The sound was careful, not hurried. Two riders emerged through the blackened skeleton of timber, a rancher and his boy, the strawberry-haired child who once asked why a cabin needed a trench. The boy was taller now, shoulders squared, like one learning the weight of his name. "Morning, Joe," the rancher called, hat turning in his hands. "Brought something." Joseph nodded once, leaning on his spade. "Good morning." The boy dismounted, cheeks ruddy from cold. In his hands he held a small bundle woven willow, sealed with clay. "Pa said, this is like what Crow families use. We made it from your telling." Joseph took it gently. It weighed almost nothing, yet it was heavy with meaning. "Seed cash," the boy said proudly. "Wild rye and prairie turnip. You said fire brings planting time." Joseph's face did not often soften, but it did then. "The prairie will thank you." The boy hesitated. Pa says we owe you for still having a place to come back to." The rancher rubbed the brim of his hat. "We could have lost everything. Would have, if the wind hadn't bowed just so. But seeing your clearing, your roof, well, it lit a thought in a stubborn man's head." He pointed toward Joseph's trench. "I dug one like that around my new house, my neighbors too. Guess we all got a touch of your crazy now." Joseph's smile was small, but genuine. "Better crazy than careless," the rancher nodded. "Ain't that truth?" They shared coffee by the cabin wall, steam rising into cold air. The boy asked about beaver lodges. Joseph explained how mud and stone made strength, how animals built for storm without needing sermons. When they rode away, Joseph watched them go with a quiet warmth, not of pride, but of knowing the lesson had rooted. That night, under quiet stars, he wrote, "I observed this day, a boy brings seeds for a land that burned. Good sign. Fire cleans, but hands must heal." Winter came early again. Snow drifted low along the creek, but this time when wind bit, it felt clean, not cruel. The forest, though skeletal, held a strange peace, the peace of endurance. Visitors came now and then through the cold months. A survey crew. A freighter carrying grain. A Crow elder, one of Snow's cousins, who brought 2 smoked fish and sat long, speaking little. He looked at the black hills and said, "Fire took the noise away." "Good for thinking." Joseph nodded. "Land remembers." The elder smiled. "Man remembers too, if he listens." And that was the creed of Joseph MacKinnon's life. In spring, grass speared through ash, first in timid clusters, then in proud waves. Elk returned to the creek. Jays scolded pine grouse again, and where cabins had once stood below, a handful rose anew, each ringed with scraped earth, each roof packed tight and low. Word had traveled. Crazy Joe was now spoken not with mockery, but with respect the kind men give reluctantly but sincerely, like soil giving water. By summer, Joseph's hair was whiter, his walk slower, but his eyes stayed sharp as awls. One dawn, he stepped outside with his ledger tucked under his arm and looked at the line of mountains glowing, pink with first light. A coyote trotted along the ridge. The world breathed. He closed the cabin door behind him but did not lock it. On the table inside sat a single page on top of his journal. Ink, neat, steady. To whoever finds these walls, if you build here, build humble. The land will test you. Fire, cold, hunger, and wind, each take their due. Listen, and work before danger arrives. Better sweat in calm than bleed in storm. I learned from crow and from river and from flame. The West is not tamed, only partnered with. May you walk it wisely. Joseph MacKinnon. He left at morning's edge, walking toward timberline. No horse, no pack more than a bedroll, flint, knife, and dried meat. A man who had lived by the land did not need much to leave it. Some say he went to live his last days among crow friends. Others believed he walked until mountains swallowed him. A few swore he became a hermit saint of the pines, still tending fire breaks and watching the wind. No grave ever marked his passing. Only the cabin roof, sod thick, trench clean, stones still in place, stood as testament. Travelers would see it and say, with quiet voices, "There lived a man who listened." Wind rustled the new grass. Saplings rose where ash once lay. And in the silence of the high country, one truth lingered old as the land, patient as winter, and forged in flame. The frontier did not reward the loud, but the ones who learned to endure. And somewhere, in the hush between pine needles, it might be said the land whispered back, "Well done, Joseph, you remembered."